march toward the arch continues as the Braves have a big game against Northern Iowa coming up. So let's get to some Braves talk.
Fans, it's time now to meet the starters for this evening's game.
What's up, everybody? Happy Saturday. Welcome to episode 4 of Braves Talk, coming off a big win at home against UIC, and we're here to break it all down, plus all the action coming up. I'm the Iceman, Matt Freites, and across from me are the pals, Coach Brad Powell, OG Rick Powell. What's up, gents?
Iceman, not a whole lot going on here. A little disappointed. Bummed out we don't have any Braves action today since they don't play until tomorrow, but the team most certainly needs the extra day of rest, and we do have a meaningful game that tips off right about when we're wrapping up with this, with the Sycamores of Indiana State traveling to Carbondale to take on Southern Illinois. So that will have an impact on how the standings shake out, could impact the Braves in some way, shape, or form, more specifically, and who their opponent ends up being. So we will definitely make sure we're watching that one, and then kind of a full slate tomorrow, which we're looking forward to.
How's it going, Rick?
Hey, it's going. I'm here.
Dynamite take by the OG. Off to a hot start here today, fellas. And that's what we always bring here to Braves Talk. So Let's get into it. By the way, we have a big win against UIC, and I will admit, so 3 games into this, I did not watch this game, and a nice little win for the Braves. So 1-0 when I don't watch, 0-2 when I do watch. Maybe we're onto something here. Maybe I need to light some candles, some incense, something like that every time there's a big game, and just hope for the best. But question mark as to how well this performance kind of played out over the course of the game. Started strong, ended weak, in my opinion. The lead swelled over 20 at one point. Obviously, they only won by 12. Each of the teams scored 45 points in the second half. Darius Hannah, though, had a great game, 21 points. Plus, I believe the moment of the game with that massive jam that has been making the rounds on YouTube. For once, the Braves get a large free throw disparity as they go to the line 27 times and actually make 25 of them. Except, in my opinion, turnovers are an issue when you are outpacing the other team when it comes to turnovers. So let's start with initial reactions as we always do. Brad, you first, and then the OG.
Yeah, so I felt like this game was a little helter-skelter at times, and I think that is probably a byproduct of our inconsistency combined with playing an inferior opponent. And when that happens a lot of times when you play lesser teams, as they kind of muck it up a little bit, and if you're not too disciplined, you find yourself maybe playing down to their level, or when you do get a lead, maybe coasting at times. So that's something that needs to be addressed, and still we struggle to be able to put teams away in the second half. We definitely have to improve defensively. Rivera went off. He was 4 for 8 from 3, 50%, obviously. UIC as a whole, 10 for 19 from behind the arc, just shy of 53% for the game. And I think, Dad, you mentioned it was in the 60s for the second half.
Yeah, almost 67%.
So that's obviously an issue, that needs to be addressed. And there were times, I know there was one time where we played great defense and, they made a shot, and I can't recall if it specifically was a 3, but they made a shot, like as a shot clock was expiring. It's like, we played 29 and a half seconds of fantastic defense. And like we've talked about before, it just seems like that sort of thing happens to Bradley more often than most. And, moving on to the Braves, the big 4 for the Braves, all in double figures, led by Hannah's career high 21 points, as you mentioned at the top. One concerning point was the 4:54 point in the second half was our last made field goal, and that was a layup by Hannah. And from that point on, we went 5 for 6 from the line, and that was it for the rest of the way, which it's tough to, again, putting teams away in the second half. It seems to be something we're struggling with right now. Neither team was good in transition. There were only 4 fast break points both ways, which I found to be interesting. I think that I like how I feel like we're playing aggressively at times, especially when we try to get out and run a little bit. It's fun to watch. We're just making too many mistakes and creating too many turnovers. with 19 on Wednesday, as you mentioned. A positive, the Braves did win the rebounding battle 37-27, which is good, but again, doesn't overshadow the turnovers, which need to be addressed. And I think, again, byproduct of the sort of our overall inconsistency and, playing a lesser opponent, as I had mentioned.
What about you, Rick?
Heck, I think Brendan's gonna covered it all. I'm sitting okay, my turn. No, he is. I mean, yeah, the defensive side, I think first half was pretty good. I mean, had some defensive lapses. Coach Wardle spoke in the post game show once he finally got there. Since they had a team meeting after that game, but he did mention, the finer details in playing defense, and Rivera, you know, it was well known, don't let him go to his right. Well, we let him go to his right pretty much at will that second half, and he lit it up. So, but with that, the turnovers, second half, it was a tale of two halves basically. We did have to, for the first half, we had to come up with a little run of our own right there at the end of the half to get that 12-point lead. I'm a big guy on the the net, the Ken Palm. And when you have a 24, 25-point lead, 13 minutes ago in the game, and they make it a 12-point game, you still win. You love the W, obviously.
Of course.
But the metrics within those two computer rankings are huge. I mean, even though, okay, the stretch for us going to the big dance is really small, but they still have an importance. And when you lose after a win, you lose 2 spots. I think in both polls we did, both computer rankings, we lost 2. Maybe one was 3. But so no matter how you play the game, finish, all them little things make a huge difference.
Well, and obviously the only path for Bradley to the NCAA tournament right now is winning Arch Madness. Like that is it, right? So, and that's where we all want to be. But at the same time, yeah, it'd be nice to have yourself in a position to get an at-large bid to the NIT if it does come down to that. And that's where those metrics would come into play. And you're right, the margin of victory does play into those metrics. And you and I had a conversation about that Wednesday night, maybe Thursday even, about how, and I was like, it wasn't so much that you lost the lead, that's not really quantified anywhere. It's just the fact that the final margin was only 12. Where if you could have kept it at a 20+ point victory, those little things do add up and help. So, we would, you like to see that happen. And I get that your point is, when you get those leads, we got to keep our foot on the gas.
Well, within those computer rankings, part of the metrics is involved is the 67% 3-point shooting, basically in the second half, will kill you in the metrics, and they'll bring you down so fast because there's defensive, there's offensive, the turnovers, they'll kill you in rankings because it's all a part of, the model to get you to your points and eventually your rankings. And I think maybe on a small scale, I think it has a lot to do, not just with even how we finish this year in those rankings, but it gives us a baseline, especially knowing the possibility of who all's coming back next year. It gives us that baseline for positivity into next season. So as a fan, it's huge. I mean, to me anyway, may not be to anybody else, but it just helps me have a perspective outlook down the road.
Let me ask you guys something, because we're 3 games into this. Obviously, I haven't been watching the team the entire year, but is it fair to say that the team has rarely put 2 halves of basketball together? I mean, even in this game against a vastly inferior opponent, they struggled at certain times where, they jump out to a big lead, which we all expect, and then here comes the comeback. And it looks to me that this team may be getting a little bit tired, a little bit weary at the end of the season, which happens to every team. So it's not as if this is specific to Bradley, but with some of these bigger games coming up and the tournament coming up, it's like, are you guys a little fearful that maybe this team is just running out of gas? That perhaps their, I don't know, like their talent is not able to overcome just how tired they are. I don't know how to put that, but I think you understand what I mean.
Well, I think within the league, we're seeing it in other places too. It's not
We are.
it's not unique to Bradley. I
No.
think we are in what people in the in the world of Major League Baseball, the dog days of summer, right? I mean, we are in that stretch of the college basketball season here in February, and of course, you would like to be playing at your best the entire season, and especially as we go through the month of February, as we're ramping up for the postseason. But these guys are banged up. They've played a lot of competitive basketball, especially like we've mentioned. The top 10 of the league are pretty solid teams, and obviously the two below that being UIC and Valpo, but they're giving people all they can handle here recently as well. So it playing these highly competitive games, physical games, is going to take its toll on a team, and especially these guys that are playing um, more minutes than others. And it's funny because we had a conversation too about how the minutes that are going to our big four are killing us a little bit, and maybe we're starting to feel the impact on that. And I did just like some general off, surface level research on what the minutes look like for the other big players in the conference, especially Indiana State and Drake and so on. And a lot of those guys, Tucker DeVries and Brody and um, some of the guys from Indiana State, Avila and Swope and Conwell and Larry. I mean, those everybody's up there in that same range. Anywhere from that, they're in that 30 to 36-minute range. And I get those 6 extra minutes. If you're playing 36 versus a guy playing 30, that 6 extra minutes a night over 20 games adds up, and is a significant difference, I guess, by the time we get to the end of the season. But Bradley's not the only team that's battling this right now in the league. And so this is where things like muscle memory, fundamentals, and mental toughness, I think, really come into play. And I feel good about Bradley in that sense, because I think those are points of emphasis from Coach Wardle to the team, are sort of these, mental toughness and focus, the things that can help keep you on track when everything else kind of starts going to hell a little bit. And I think that might be why they had such a long meeting after the game, and he was late getting to radio out in the post game, because it was one of those, what I can assume was hey, we're going to lock the door and no one's leaving until we figure this out. Let's just, everybody, if you got anything to get off your chest, let's get it off our chest, and let's walk out of here with a common understanding of where we're going from this point forward, because it's very evident that some things have to change. So let's all be on the same page so we can get to work on making those improvements. And I think every team, especially teams that ultimately end up being successful, they reach a point in their season where you have that, pivotal moment, that come to Jesus meeting, or whatever you want to call it, where, you can sort of launch yourself to the next level or get back on track. And I'm hopeful that that's the result of this.
Yeah, I still do. I think Bradley is one of the stronger, or God, how do I even say this? The better endurance team.
Battle
because
tested.
I think our off season program, had always been very strong, where I never used to be concerned about where our guys' fatigue was as a team in February. This year is a little bit different, but I also, hey, we lost two important players in guards, which I think has played a very large part in the weariness in the appearance of our legs. And when you're shooting threes, I mean, it's a leg issue, in most cases. But, I always think we were one of the strongest teams that could outlast, endurance wise, anybody in the league. I don't know if we've gotten away from some of that, but if we did, let's try and get back to it.
Well, I think it's what you mentioned at the beginning, where you said, or at the beginning of your take there, where you mentioned we were counting on Pettigrew and Ellis to come in here and play some meaningful minutes, and that isn't the case. And so we are having to rely on Duke Dean and Connor Hickman to play, and Darius to play a boatload more of minutes, and not so much. I mean, I guess you could say Darius in the sense of some of the big guys haven't come along to the degree that we maybe hoped that they would. But and that's just it. When we talk about the bench, and you and I had this conversation on the way home, and I said, because I said yes, like the bench, like playing the bench, right? We had a conversation about trusting the bench, playing the bench. The guys on the bench, I'm outside of Birch, and Birch is playing, but outside of that, like, if we're going to talk about Kyle Thomas and Meta, those guys don't help your guard problem, and that's probably where our biggest issue, our biggest concern is as far as fatigue. Yeah, Malavai's playing a lot of minutes, and Darius is playing a lot of minutes, but right at the guard position between Duke and Connor, you have Birch that can come in. I mean, that's why we're seeing Hartke playing minutes here and there, because that's he's the next guy. I mean, he's the next guard we have that's an option at all. So, Kyle Thomas, while it'd be nice to see him be able to come along and contribute more, and it'd be nice to see Meta come along, those guys don't fix the guard problem.
Nope.
And Rick, to your point, if you look at the stats from this game, then 2 of 7 from 3-point in the second half for Bradley. Now, they took a lot less shots, so they went from, I think they had 31 shots in the first half for 32 to 21 total from the field, and I'm sure that obviously leads to other teams being able to get back and so forth, but I think you're right. This team has relied on consistent 3-point shooting, and when they don't shoot consistently from 3, I think that is a good sign that maybe this team is getting tired. But I asked this only to hypothesize about the future, not necessarily that they're in trouble and the only team in trouble in the conference.
Yeah, well, we shot, what was it, 11 field goals less the second half. Why? Look at the turnovers. I think we only had 8 or 9 into the first half. But when you're turning it over 10 times, 11 times, number of field goal opportunities are going down.
Yes.
So,
and turnovers are so frustrating, because it's like, how do you coach that out, right? Like in football, if you're throwing interceptions, you can kind of go to a quarterback and say, all right, are you going through your reads? Are you seeing the defense or whatever? But in basketball, sometimes it's just sloppiness. You know what I mean? Like that's where some of the turnovers come from. Not all the time, but sometimes it is. And it's like, can you coach that out? It's frustrating as a fan.
It is, and I think, and basketball is so fluid, right? It's really hard sometimes to, it's not always so black and white as it may be sometimes in football when it comes to reads and things, which I think makes it a little more complex as well. A couple things I think need to be mentioned is, one, Christian Davis gave us a ton off the bench on Wednesday, which was huge, and he came off the. What's that, Dan?
That was his best game in 2 or 3 anyway.
Yeah, 27 minutes.
And he had 9 points, which is good, and he played pretty good defense. And so I think that's a huge thing moving forward if we can continue to get that out of him. And then another person I've thought about that we haven't talked a lot about, and we've mentioned his name more in this podcast than we have all year, is Darius Hannah. He has been so solid and consistent and good for this team throughout the season. And I think maybe that's why we haven't talked about him as much, is because he hasn't been up and down and up and down. Like it hasn't been as noticeable, I guess, just because he's so damn reliable and consistent. And it's almost like, I found like maybe we're taking it for granted a little bit, which we shouldn't, because it's so important and impactful.
And looking at the bench, right? Atlason plays 18 minutes, 2 points, takes 2 field goals. Meta plays 4 minutes, gets 6 points, right? So it's like, you want some sort of consistency from these bench guys, but I think we're focusing on the negatives on a win. Like a win is a win, and I think we need to look forward. And I think we need to mention here as well that probably the biggest result from the Valley this week was Indiana State going down to Illinois State, and that sent reverberations through Twitter as far as my Twitter feed was concerned. And I think that it puts a spotlight on the league. It certainly brings Indiana State back toward Drake and kind of gives a little bit of hope that maybe Indiana State isn't this juggernaut. But I know you guys disagree on this, and I think I might disagree with Rick on this, but I kind of think now that after that loss, it's tough to see this conference getting an at-large and then a bid steal. That's just my opinion.
Well, we still got 5 games to play. And that's going to determine a lot. And we can learn more here in a couple hours. If Indiana State goes down tonight, then I'm 100%. It's a one bid league, 100%. The Redbird win, hey, great win for them, but I'm keeping my enthusiasm in check because I'm looking at the bigger picture, as what I've said in previous show is Indiana State's a 6-man rotation. Their fatigue and tiredness playing in the middle of February is really shining. And when they didn't have Kent pretty much the entire second half, that's one of the starting 5. So they're down a guy and yeah, I mean, it was at home too. So, I mean, their fatigue level is really showing, and I would not be surprised if they get upset tonight.
What's your so let's not stray away from the original question. What is your opinion? Like what's your stance, your argument for if Indiana State wins out and loses in the conference tournament championship, you still think they could be an at-large bid, and I want to know why.
I do. Because they're because they put a lot of emphasis on the quad 1s, 2s, 3s, whatever. They've only got one loss, just one loss period outside of the quad 1. Now they don't have very many quad 1 opportunities, but they have that. They've got the net where they're at. They're all the stuff that is accumulating.
So
for the net,
right? So the metrics, right? You think
yes.
So I'll give you this. I think if you look at the metrics, the metrics are likely that of a tournament team, or real damn close, anyways. But what I'm saying is, I don't think it is convincing enough to overcome the Power 6 bias, and that's just the reality of it. That's just the truth, man. Like, and so if you just want to look at this on paper, black and white, the most qualified teams based off the metrics and their resumes, like Indiana State should certainly, under the circumstances of winning out, losing in the conference championship game, should absolutely be in the conversation. But I'm telling you, my opinion based off history and reality. Yeah, and you have to factor that in.
The thing is, there's a lot of Power 5 conferences that are actually down this year, and that's unfortunate. That bias is so strong that several of those teams are still going to get in.
I mean, even the ACC,
because there's a lot of mid-major schools that's not going to get in. That's very worthy of going in and beating even the middle of the pack Power 6 team.
Yeah, what you need to watch for in terms of this conference being a 2-bid conference is what happens in these Power 5 conferences with these teams that are either on the fringe of getting in or on the bubble. What you don't want is to have this team that's probably one of the last 4 in start to go on a run. Indiana State loses early in the tournament. Like, I think there is a lot of factors that could go into it, but I'm with Brad on this in that I think traditionally, and just looking at the way that the committee looks at these things, that loss probably made some of the committee members feel better because they're like, oh, good. We only have to take whoever comes out of this conference. We don't have to consider. Yeah. And right or wrong, I think that that's the way that they look at it. And that's the only thing that's unfortunate. I think it
gives Indiana them a State reason.
Wins. Yeah, it does. And that's why I say that is just, I mean, we have to be realistic about this, even from Bradley's chances. As Brad said, their best chance to get in the tournament is to just win out and win through Arch Madness. And that's all that they should be focusing on. But they do have a game coming up, I think tomorrow, right, at 1 o'clock, I believe, on ESPN2 as they play Northern Iowa. It's a road game. They easily handled the Panthers at Carver last month or late last month. And I think if they win, this puts some major distance, at least between the top 3 teams and the rest of the pack as it relates to Arch Madness or getting to Arch Madness. And so what do you guys think about this game? And I'm going to put up the Arch Madness projected bracket while we talk about this.
Well, it's tough to beat Northern Iowa at their home court, but we can do it. I mean, there is a possibility that Heisey won't be playing. He's got I think an ankle injury, but probably a game time decision. But that's based on what I read and heard from the last game they played Wednesday. I don't think he played then, but we got to keep the little gnat at bay. We got Tristan Anderson and
Titan Anderson.
Titan Anderson and Hudson Hudson to keep in check. But and we guard the 3-point line and take care of the boards, keep our turnovers down, and hit shots ourselves. Should be all right.
And it's funny. I'm sorry, Brad. I was going to say it's funny how this game now, the way that you look at this bracket, where Northern Iowa has jumped all the way to the 4 seed in this conference, and a team that I know Rick is a little bit more worried about when it comes to playing Bradley at Belmont is sitting at 6. So like, there's a lot of jockeying for position here that could have a lot to do with it. And I think Bradley needs to do everything you said, Rick, but they need to take care of business. And Brad, you're going to say how they're going to do that.
Well, I think that it sounds cliche, but going into this, I mean, a lot of these games here down the stretch, outside of at Drake, which is a unique thing in its own, it's Bradley. These are Bradley versus Bradley games, right? Like Bradley cannot beat themselves in these games. If they don't beat themselves, they should win. The only game I think that you could qualify as a coin flip, even if Bradley's playing at their best, would be the game at Drake. The rest of these games, if Bradley plays to their potential, should be wins. And so I look at these are Bradley versus Bradley games. We got to clean up some of these mistakes. I'm curious to see how the team bounces back from, the way that game finished on Wednesday. Obviously, they had their little powwow. They got an extra day's rest going into this game. And I feel like I've said this last few games, looking for us to come out and make some of the corrections, cut down on the turnovers, play 2 halves of great defense. Because I feel like we're playing at 60 to 70% of our potential right now. And you don't have to play at 100 to beat most teams. But if 90 will get the job done the majority of the time against most opponents, because a lot of other people don't always play to their potential either. But I feel like Bradley's been consistently here last few games playing at 60 to 70% of their capacity. And Brendan is absolutely correct there. He says he remembers Barry Henson's Missouri State team was left out with a power rating in the 20s, and it ultimately cost him his job. And that's just it. And like, I get that bias isn't official metric, but it plays a huge part in how this all works, unfortunately. And a lot of it comes down to money, and there's so much that goes into it. And I mean, and Dad and I had this argument the other day that as much as we, as mid-major basketball fans, love the underdog, the Cinderellas, all that stuff, like I'm pretty confident, and I can't remember the exact scenario or the numbers, that the numbers don't reflect that, like as a whole, like the viewership numbers, especially when you get down to the Sweet 16, Elite 8, Final Four, like the viewership for those games that have those Cinderella teams in them are not the same as they are for if you had 2 Power 5 teams or 2 Blue Bloods. And I got to imagine, like attendance wise, like these Power 6 teams have larger fan bases. So even if only 20% of their fan base is going to physically go to a game, that's still far more than a mid-major is going to send, even if they send their entire fan base in some cases. So it sucks that even has an impact on any of it, but it does. And I don't think we can ignore it when considering these types of things. And, and so I think as we move towards the conference tournament, and looking at the bracket as you posted it, I think there's really like 2 primary things for Bradley. One is hold the 3 seed. You got to hold the 3 seed, which they would really have to tank for them to fall out of the 3 seed. Things would have to go really poorly the next 5 games, but hold the 3 seed and then do whatever you got to do to be as healthy and rested as possible going into Arch Madness. And so I think the coaching staff is going to have to get creative and find ways to save the legs of our big 4, especially, so that they can be at their best, at the best that we can have them, to be expected in March for the tournament. And those are things that I think are crucial to postseason success for the Braves.
Rick, I got a question for you. And this is projecting a little bit more into the future, but I think it's worth it here based off what Brad said, is holding the 3 seed. Looking at the standings now, Bradley would have some work to do to get up to the 2 line. And is there an added benefit of going from 3 to 2 outside of who you might play, obviously a lesser seed, whatever? But when they get to that last game of the season, if there's no way that they can move up or down from the 3, is there a scenario where you can see them resting their starters for that last game at Drake? I know that it's a rival, but you want to make sure you're rested going into Arch Madness. Do you see a scenario there?
Nope. Never. There's never a scenario where we're gonna, not unless we go into Drake and we're up 20 plus, 10 minutes to go in the second half, and even then, no, we don't have anybody on the bench worthy enough. I should
That's
say that.
so funny.
You got to trust your
Interesting
bench.
you
I was
say
actually
that.
going to say that.
No, we do not have.
You hypocrite.
No, that's not what I'm saying. Taking me out of context. We don't have.
Yeah.
No, because I do have faith in guys, but in even 15, 20 point lead at Drake 10 minutes ago, you'll leave yourself. You got to bring in starters to play with them. That's always how I always look. If you're going to bring in guys off the bench that don't have a lot of, necessarily a lot of talent, a lot of minutes experience on the court, you got to play them with regulars. So you're not bringing everybody off the bench to go up against Drake's best. I'm sorry.
I mean, Drake could also be in the same position where they don't have anything else to.
They won't either. They won't either. That's just
grinding him into the ground, right?
I just don't think that
tournament. I know
fan bases. I don't think would accept it. Either one, and you don't really see that. We see it in football, for sure. We definitely see it in football at times, but you don't see that. It's an interesting perspective because if there's nothing to lose or gain other than just bragging rights, which are worth something in this league for sure. I don't want to understate that. But you think you would try to maybe consider some sort of plan to preserve guys, and maybe it's like, hey, if this thing's out of hand one way or the other at halftime, we do some different things in the second half. But like you said, Dad, if it gets to a 10 or if it's a 15, 20 point lead with 10 minutes to go, that lead would evaporate quickly if we brought in 5 guys from the bench against their starters the rest of the way. And that's just reality. I mean, we have a hard enough time stopping Brody and DeVries with our starters. So I wouldn't feel great about that. I don't think that's going to happen. Both teams will play that game out in its entirety, is in my opinion.
Yeah, and we'll worry about that when we get there.
If you want to rest players between now and tournament time, you rest them now. You bring in Birch for another 5 minutes more than what he's been getting. You play Christian Davis, but you never have Duke and Hick on the bench at the same time. One of them's got to be out there, to play with Birch, and vice versa. But now's the time to start doing that. Play, draw up some plays more for Allison too, by the way.
Well, he's got to show he can start putting the ball in the basket a little more consistently. I mean, we've talked about it a little bit. His offensive game seems to be suffering at the expense of his effort on improving on defense.
Getting involved in the offense early in the game. Set something up for him early. Let him get a couple of shots off. Once he sees the ball go in, it's like the one game about 3-4 games back. He come in, he missed a shot, come down, hit it, threw up another one, hit every part of the rim, bounced on through for a 3. And after that, he hit 2 or 3 more, if I'm not mistaken.
That's why they call it the land of 10,000 coaches, folks, because we got them all over the place. There's landmines everywhere. It is the Valley. So, Rick, we're going to tee you up for your segment here. We got a couple of matchups in the Valley that I think are worth mentioning this weekend. Indiana State, as we pointed out, at Southern, and Murray State at Drake. So why don't you give us some of your insight of those games?
The Indiana State Southern game to me is, I'm going to be sitting watching it. Obviously, you got to, the pick, is you pick Indiana State to win that one, but don't sell Southern short because they can pull it off. Pretty easily if they want, if they wanted to, but depends on, is a rested Indiana State coming? Is Kent available to play? Because there's, possibility you may have suffered a concussion and they may not be out of concussion protocol. So that game.
What are your thoughts on it? It seems like it's become apparent that Indiana State has struggled against the zone. And Southern is known, and Brian Mullen is known for being a good defensive coach. And so, do you think that we may see some different things from them defensively tonight in order to slow down Indiana State? And do you think there is anything to the belief that they struggle against zone defenses?
No, they do struggle. We've proved it. Illinois State proved it. Maybe they learned something from us. Doubt it, but who knows? But yeah, Mullen's a smart defensive coach. He'll figure it out. As long as he doesn't stay true to his man-to-man nature. But if he, I think he can. It'll be it's going to be a fun, interesting game to watch.
Yeah. And Murray State and Drake, what do you got there?
Oh, what Murray State team's going to show up?
Cool.
They come out. A lot of times they come out and they'll play like they can beat anybody. But once they start getting down, even if they're up on somebody and someone starts making a run on them, then you'll get one or two of their better guys start playing me ball. And when they start playing, they get out of the team concept and they falter. And then, that's how several of their losses have happened. I sit and watch several of their games, and that's how they lose games. And it being a Drake home game.
What I'm curious to see out of both Indiana State and Drake tonight and tomorrow is the fatigue factor, much like the Braves. Is that seem like it's compounding? Are they doing anything differently to try to rest their not rest their guys, but to try to preserve some minutes a little bit? Are they going deeper into their bench? I mean, Indiana State's going to have to without Kent, if that's the case. But
they not got outside of one guy. They've not got a very good proven bench.
Right. Well, I mean, that's truthfully that's the case. Well, that's the case for the top three. The top three don't have much depth, which I think is gonna make things, just as a general Valley fan, it's gonna make things really interesting in St. Louis because of the lack of depth that the top three teams have.
Yeah, and all three of the top three play basically the teams right underneath them. So we're going to kind of know at this point how much separation there is going to be, and there's probably not going to be any disruption at the top. And Bradley's probably going to be at that 3 seed. I think that's where they want to stay. But those are some big games coming up this weekend. Obviously, we're going to be covering Bradley all of next week as well. We are racing toward the end of the season. It's going to be here before we know it. And let's all hope for a great season, a great end of the season. And it would be great for us, for the purposes of the show, if we could get a conference championship out of this thing. That's what I want.
Yeah, that would be really exciting for sure. And I think a step, looking at the tournament, I think what you'd like to see happen from a Bradley perspective is you want to see Belmont and Murray State end up in those 4 and 5 slots, I think, and end up on the top half of the bracket. And it's again, you can't be afraid of anybody, but I just think from a matchup perspective and the capabilities of those teams, you want to see them on the other side of the bracket. Indiana State have to deal with them instead, which, I mean, in that case would likely put a Southern or Northern Iowa against UIC feeding into Bradley, I think, at that point in time, which, again, all of those teams could pose issues for sure, but I feel better about how we match up against those teams than I do against Murray State and Belmont, especially Belmont being back at full strength. And then again, like our expert said, you never know which Murray State team's going to show up.
Very true. And the only thing you have to be afraid of in the Valley is Rick Powell walking around Carver Arena looking to slap some ignorant fans in the face. So for everybody who
Which I would never do, by the way.
Absolutely not. We'll only find that out when you're in the police report. So for everybody that has tuned in or has joined us since we started, a big thank you. We recently saw a surge in subscribership, and even though I can't get to the bottom of it, I'm going to assume that it's everybody who has found Braves Talk from the Peoria area all over the country. We've seen an overwhelming response to this, and we want to thank everybody. If you want to find us on social media, on X at Iceman and Coach, TikTok at INC Sports, Facebook, INC Sports, and of course, as the flag says, the Matty Ice Media Network, where you can find Iceman and Coach, which is what Coach and I do, Fire Footwear, which is my sneaker podcast. And from the pals over there, including the one who punches people in the face, from Coach, from me, and from everybody in Bradley, this is Braves Talk. We'll see you next time.